I'm going to do the timeline. Why don't you come up when I'm done and critique me? I'll give you 10 minutes, I won't interrupt. Why don't you critique me, and you and I can dialogue for an hour? He said, well, I haven't prepared, but I think I know the stuff okay. Yeah, I'll come up. So I finished. He came up. We put two stools on the stage. He talked. And one of the, by the way, it was Ratio Christi. How many of you here with Ratio Christi? Okay, a number of you. It was Ratio Christi who sponsored this. And the director of Ratio Christi heard some of the Iowa atheists saying this when they said, hey, we got news for you guys. Your favorite, Evan Fales, we're going to invite him up on the stage tonight and have a talk. And he heard some of the atheists say, these Christians are really cool. We passed out stuff for them, and now they're having Evan up there. And it was such a congenial type thing. I didn't hear Evan say one negative thing in an hour, not one critical thing. But later he wrote an email, and he said, sorry what I said about the atonement. He copied myself and the director of Ratio Christi. I said, I didn't hear you say anything about the atonement. He said, yeah, I said that sometimes I think it's like child abuse. But I'm sorry I said that. I know people are sensitive, and I might have hurt somebody. And the director of Ratio Christi said, yeah, I got a feeling our students have heard a lot worse than that on the Iowa campus. Don't worry about it. Ever since then, he's been writing to us saying, you guys are really cool. Can we do another event together on campus? This is cool. But I couldn't believe when I heard the atheists were passing out our material. So there are some grounds for rapport and some grounds for getting this stuff on the table. And I like what Greg Kokel says. He says, I didn't come to this campus to convert you. I think he probably did, but so I didn't come to this campus to convert you. I came here to what? What?
Leave a rock in the shoe.
Put a rock in your shoe. I love that. I'm going to put a rock in your shoe. I want you to go away thinking about this. And this is what I want people to go away thinking about. All right. I told you this is a longer list, but keep in mind that the asterisks are the 6 that I would call out for the minimal facts. I'm just going to read them for right now. Jesus died by crucifixion. He was buried. You go, well, some people believe he's buried in a common pit. He was buried, right? I didn't specify. The disciples despaired, thinking that all hope was lost. Whoop, our whatever is off there, but sorry. My computer crashed this week. And I did this in my hotel room last night, and I went to bed promptly at 3:30, just thinking about you folks. You were on my mind. Thanks for coming. All right, very soon afterwards. Now those are asterisks. You can't see them, very small font, but that's asterisk by number 5. Very soon afterwards, Jesus' disciples had real experiences that they thought were appearances of the risen Jesus. And you go, give me a break. The critics believe this? That gets awful close to resurrection, you know. Hey, this, along with the crucifixion, are probably the most widely believed, critically acclaimed facts in the New Testament. Bart Ehrman says, of course I believe that the disciples, he says, or at least some of them, he said, but of course I believe that the disciples thought they saw the risen Jesus. And he says this, he says, why wouldn't I believe it? It's proven by historical investigation. Bart Ehrman. 6, Christians taught that the resurrection appearances of Jesus were bodily in nature. 7, by the way, 30 years ago, when I was in grad school, no, 30, more like 70, 41, almost nobody believed that the appearances were bodily, except evangelicals and conservative Catholics. Today, it's the majority view, from what I can tell from the literature, believing that the appearances were bodily. There's no star there, no asterisk, but we're doing well. We're coming up on this one, coming up in terms of head count. 7, also asterisk. The disciples were transformed even to the point of being willing to die for this message. 8, also asterisk. The message was proclaimed at a very early date, like I already said, 1 to 2 years for sure. Saul of Tarsus, Paul, had a real experience that he likewise thought was an appearance of the risen Jesus. That's asterisks. 10, asterisks. James, the brother of Jesus, had a real experience that he likewise thought was an appearance of the risen Jesus. 11, Sunday became the primary day of worship. And 12, Jesus predicted his resurrection appearances ahead of time. Now, because I'm out of time to come back to this, let me tell you why number 12 is so important. When you're establishing worldview, when critics, very common, new book just came out from an Ivy League press saying the resurrection never happened by a philosophy professor at a Big Ten school. And when scholars say it's often a little sleight of hand, they're right, but it's often a little sleight of hand, you guys have to catch them on it. They'll say, there's no way history can prove a miracle. It could never happen. Now, what they're not telling you is, what many of them, maybe most, mean by this is, history can show you events occurred, but only philosophy or history can construct an argument that that could only have come from God's hand. Historians don't have any test called the miracle test. So if they sound really critical, they'd say, no historian in this world believes that there's a test for God performing an event. Oh, but theologians and philosophers can go there, right? Well, they could try. You have to kind of catch them on what they're saying. Okay, so there's a couple steps here. We want to establish an event. That's why number 5, disciples had real experiences that they thought were appearances of the risen Jesus. You go, well, that's the fact, but that's not resurrection. It's true. What do you need to make this resurrection? 2 things. And one of them I'll mention a little bit later. But 2 things. Naturalistic theories need to fail. Naturalistic alternatives need to be disproven. And if you're critical of critics coming up with naturalistic theories, remember that most of us would do it. If our best friend would say, hey, did you hear what happened in church at Wednesday night prayer meeting? Yeah, this guy, you know Bob. Bob's been sick for a long time, and he's got XYZ disease, and elders called him up and laid hands on him, and Bob's healed, and he just went to the hospital today, and they can't find any, you know how this thing goes. But you might sit there and go, really? If I went over to Bob's house right now, would he be limping around with the same disease? Were you there yourself? No, there was a World Series game on last night. So you're not an eyewitness. See, we would do the same sort of things. Who'd you hear this from? My pastor. Yeah, he didn't go to seminary, though. We do the same kinds of questions. Anybody can be skeptical. But do you know that of the 5 major categories of naturalistic theories for the resurrection, all 5 of them are reported in the Gospels? And you know that 3 of the 5 of them are reported by Christians? Don't tell me Christians don't ask tough questions. I tell you the truth. My grad students, 3 of my PhD students, wait a minute, is Guy here? No, he went to one of the other sessions. He's going to flunk. 3 of 4 PhD students are here today. And they know, we do this in class. They can make up any theory they want. They can say anything. You've got to defend it. You can't just say it. You've got to defend your view. And there'll be a lot of class, pushback on you. But the Bible itself gives 5 naturalistic theories, and 3 of them are by Christians. My PhD students ask way better questions than questions I get at state universities from unbelievers, who make assertions but almost never back it up. No data, or if there is, they don't know what it is. So first thing you got to do, what do you do with 5? You've got to disprove the alternatives. And number 2, you've got to make that little move that I just told you about. You have to get from the disciples experienced something, second step, same point. Disciples experienced it, 5A, natural theories don't work. 5B, let me tell you why I think God did it. Now you got a complete argument. They think they saw him. Everybody thinks they saw him. As Bart Ehrman says, it's historical proof. Naturalistic theories fail, and you need we call it in philosophy, a divine action pattern to trace a miracle to God's hand. Let me give you an example of what I mean by divine action pattern. If a homeless person in your town died last night, and they got there in time to rush him to the hospital, and he had a near-death experience, that's pretty cool. But these things happen. I just sent an article in for publication with the major research press, and I gave sources for 300 well-evidenced near-death experiences. Some of them are so unbelievable, you would think we were talking Twilight Zone. Dead serious. All right, so it happens to a street person. Pretty cool near-death experience. What do you do with that? I don't know. It's not very theological. Kind of a cool account. I don't think he's a very good witness. I'm just saying what you might say. And the article's on the front page of the paper. Do you cut it out? How many of you cut it out if a street person had an ND and you put it in your file? Nobody here. You know why? Because you all go online and get the thing. You text it to somebody or something. All right, for those of you who didn't see, not one person raised their hand. Nobody cuts the article out. Why? There's no theological significance to a street person having a near-death experience. It's like, it happens. What's it mean? Don't know. But what if I told you they just discovered evidence that Muhammad was raised from the dead? Historical evidence, and Christian scholars are admitting it. How many of you cut the article out? Still none. No, there's a number of you. Okay, what's the difference? A divine action pattern, or at least a claimed divine action pattern. You need something besides the event. You need some significance for the person about whom the action occurs. That's why we talk about number 12. Jesus predicted his resurrection ahead of time. Why? Watch this, it's really, really cool. 12 by itself, there's others. 12 is a divine action pattern all by itself. Because if a street person has a heart attack, let's say, is resuscitated, has an NDE, like I said, those things happen. But if this was the guy downtown who's been saying for the last few days, he's clean-shaven, showers regularly, he's clean-shaven, and he says, I'm the Son of God. And in a week, I'm going to rise from the dead. Is that more significant? Probably want to do some research. If you're an apologist, if you check these things out. But Jesus is such a special person. Consider the following. There's a book on my website you can download for free, but it's on the uniqueness of Jesus vis-a-vis the world religions. It's right up there front when you go right on it, GaryHabermas.com. There's 2 books there. Evidence for the Historical Jesus, which goes into the creeds, these early creeds, and is Jesus unique? Consider the following. What's a divine action pattern for Jesus? Consider the following. He's the only founder of a major world religion who claimed to be God. You go, really? Buddha claimed that, didn't he? Buddha was probably an atheist, according to Buddhists. Zoroaster claimed that, didn't he? Thinking you might, score a point by taking an obscure person. No, he's a prophet and only a prophet. Muhammad. No, because in Quran, if you compare, in Muslim thought, if you compare anyone or anything to Allah, it's heresy, and that includes, it's one unpardonable sin, and that includes Muhammad. He's a prophet. Very high prophet, but he's a prophet. Okay? You all know from the Old Testament, take your pick, Daniel, David, Jeremiah. Abraham, not the Son of God. Who else you want to try? Krishna. You know what? Krishna is called Lord in the Bhagavad Gita. You know, interesting thing? Hindu scholars generally say Krishna never lived. You go, well, a lot of people say that about Jesus. Not scholars, and not a majority. Majority of Hindus think, according to one Hindu source, majority of Hindus don't believe Krishna lived. But if he did, it's kind of like, I kind of wished he did. Because the difference between the century he was supposed to have lived in, BC, and the earliest extant source for the Bhagavad Gita, got to be ready for this, 4,200 years. I don't care what the text calls them. That's not history. So Jesus is the only founder of major world religion who claimed to be deity. Okay? He's the only founder of major religion who said, what you do with me determines where you spend eternity. I'd say next to claiming deity, that's probably the next most unique claim. Okay, here's another one. Jesus is the only founder of a major world religion of whom miracles are reported within a generation. And when I went to graduate school, unless you were conservative, Catholic, or evangelical, you didn't believe Jesus did miracles. Today, it is not only the majority view among critics, it is virtually unanimous. James Crossley? Yep. Morris Casey? Yep. Jesus a miracle worker? What aren't you telling me? Well, I mean, they don't always agree that these events were supernatural, but they said that things just like the Gospels recorded happened, and who knows, maybe they were. Marcus Borg, one of the best-known critics in the world, he died a couple years ago, but he said, co-founder of the Jesus Seminar, he said, did Jesus raise Lazarus? I don't know. Jesus was a very special man. How do we know how far his powers went? Can you imagine that? All right. Claim to be God. What you do with me determines where you spend eternity. He does miracles. And I think I do 6 of them in the book. That guy is raised from the dead. That is called a divine action pattern. You don't just have a guy who made some either no claims, some not many, not good ones. You have a guy who's made absolutely unique claims. Stephen Neal, when I went to a secular school for my master's degree in philosophical theology, I took a course of world religions. The author of our text, Oxford University, said, nobody who has ever lived has said and done the things Jesus did. He's the one who was raised from the dead. Wow. That's why Stephen Davis, the well-known philosopher, said, that's why critics can't concede a resurrection for Jesus. It would disprove their whole worldview. So those are the first 2 moves you make with 5. I've got 12 up here because it's what we're talking about. But you go back to 5. Critics believe Jesus was raised from the dead. Critics believe the disciples thought he was raised from the dead. 5a, natural theories fail. 5b, we have a divine action pattern. Now you've got an argument for the supernatural in the form of Jesus' resurrection and, of course, Jesus' accreditation. But you know what prediction means? This is one of my other 6. That means Jesus knew about the plan ahead of time. He predicted the most unique event in the history of the world. He predicted it ahead of time. What's that mean? He's part of the deal. He's in on it. What, a fake? No, we've already talked about that. You can't explain away the naturalistic theories. So what is it? I don't know. And in one of my debates years ago, it said on the above the door in the room, it said no smoking. This professor was an atheist. He thought it was cool. 60s, He always lit up a pipe. We're debating. You know how a guy sounds when he's talking with the pipe? So what's your point? And he's smoking the pipe while he's talking. I said, you can't go there, the naturalistic theory is false. Can't go there. And he had a temper. And he did this. Habermas, you're starting to get me in a corner, and I don't like it. As far as I'm concerned, this debate is over, and he refused to talk anymore. This is a long time ago, but it's kind of weird. I go, well, isn't that kind of strange? You're the naturalist. I ask you for a naturalistic theory, and you don't want to play the game. If you're a naturalist, are you comfortable that you don't have anything going for you, and there's a lot against you? 6 unique claims by Jesus, plus the recipient of the greatest event in the world? Looks bad. If naturalistic theories fail, you have a divine action pattern. Okay? Now, I thought we were going to get to a point where I wouldn't be able to do a whole lot more, so instead of trying to give you evidence up here for everything, I've got a couple slides to show you where you can go with potential evidence on some of these other points. You didn't see number 4? You're right, I was just wanted to see if you were listening. What happened to number 4, Doug? Let's see. Buried, despair. Not a minimal fact. You got all those. You got all 6, right? 1, 2, number 5, 3, 4, 5, and 6. You got all 6. What if I told you the one we left out, thank you for that, is the most highly evidenced fact in the list, but it's not one of my minimal facts? It's not one of my minimal facts only because it flunks the second test. Critics don't grant it to the 90-something percentile. The empty tomb. But here's why it's there. I gave a lecture to a bunch of scholars last November, and it was called 21 Evidences for the Empty Tomb. Now, you ready? All 21 are arrived at by critical methods, and critics don't always buy critical arguments, but the vast majority do. 21 arguments for an empty tomb. 21 arguments coming in like this. An empty tomb is great because when someone says, just to give you one example, well, the disciples hallucinated. Well, you don't hallucinate in groups. That's great. In our earliest creed, 1 Corinthians 15:3 and following from 30 to 32 AD, has 3 groups. The disciples, all the apostles, 500. And secondly, as I ask my students, the way I usually say it, is the hallucination theory a full tomb or empty tomb theory? Is hallucination a full tomb theory or an empty tomb theory? It's a full tomb theory. If the disciples hallucinated, the tomb would be full. But the tomb was empty to the tune of 21 evidences. Can't be hallucination. You go, well, so yeah, but still, you said the majority, and I know you said if there wasn't an asterisk there, it would only be about 75. Why is empty tomb there in the list? Because there's about 75% of scholars accept it. But you know, when I went to school, grad school, unless you're a conservative Catholic or an evangelical, virtually nobody accepted the empty tomb in the 70s. Today, about 75% of scholars accept it, and a number of them are skeptics who don't believe in any reliability. So that was number 4. Thank you for bringing that up. Whoops. Okay, here's just a couple really brief examples. Why is the crucifixion never questioned? I mean, I've done a head count, and as nearly as I can tell from 1975 to date, French, German, and English sources, the primary scholarly languages, there are, every time I say something, somebody will give me an extra name, so I'm not going to say no one else. But there's maybe a dozen or less specialists who believe Jesus didn't die on the cross. And if you said name some, I could probably get to 5 because I said 12 just to make sure, but I only have 5 in my list. You go, well, I could name more than that. They're probably not specialists. They're probably the basement bloggers. And they'll sometimes say, swoon. Why don't they say anything else? Because there's a lot of comeback. Like what? Here's just one for you. Bart Ehrman, maybe the best skeptic of all. Paul Meyer, Western Michigan University, says ancient historical events are often established by a single source. Bart Ehrman lists 12 sources within 100 years for the crucifixion of Jesus. 12 different sources. And you go, oh, I'll bet you're quoting the New Testament again. Well, first of all, I already told you. Do you know who this is? This isn't Billy Graham. This is an agnostic leaning toward atheism, and he's a specialist with a PhD from Princeton Seminary, New Testament, who lost his faith. But anyway, 4 of the sources are not New Testament. The Gospel of Peter, Bart dates it about 120 to 130 AD. Almost everybody else, I just did a survey, about everybody else, not everybody else, but the majority put Peter at about 150 to 185, somewhere in there. But I'm asking, what does Bart do? And Peter, Thomas, Josephus, and Tacitus. Now, if you read the basement bloggers, they'll say things like, no critic today accepts those 2 sources in Josephus. How about every critic today accepts the 2 sources in Josephus? Now, it's not everyone, but there's 2 sources in Josephus. The first one on Jesus, the majority of them do. The second one, which the critics also say are not accepted by probably 95%. So here's 4 that are not. Folks, if one source establishes an event in the ancient world, what about 12? Now, I'm not counting like, oh, Acts and Luke, that's 2. No, it's not, that's 1. That's one author. Oh, well, critics even think Paul wrote at least 7 of the books with his name. Oh, that's 7. No, it's not, it's 1. Paul's the author. Well, this is in Mark. And if it's a passage where Matthew and Luke borrows it from Mark, that's 3, right? That's 1. If Mark's the source, it's 1. This is pretty strict. And we have 12. That just gets you started on crucifixion. And this is nowhere near the best defense of crucifixion. If any of you are up on the information, today still the best critique of the swoon theory is what is popularly called the Strauss critique. The David Strauss critique from 19th century German theology. Strauss was the second most liberal of the 19th century. He was kicked out of a liberal university for being too liberal. True story. And here's one on early proclamation. We've already done this, but here's some text for you. The sources go back to within 1 to 2 years of the cross, as per skeptical scholars like Bart Ehrman, Morris Casey, James Crossley, plus some other not skeptical of that sort, but excellent New Testament scholars. Richard Bauckham of Cambridge, Larry Hurtado, retired from Edinburgh, James D.G. Dunn from, that's supposed to be James D.G. Dunn, I guess I goofed that up, recently retired from Durham, one of the top British schools. And here's some of the texts that do it. Paul saying it was early and important. Galatians 1 is where he checks it out with them. Galatians 2 is when he goes back and checks it out with them. Acts sermon summaries, I gave you the list I already did earlier, 1 to 5, 10, 13, 17. One text that's set up here that's very, very important, 1 Corinthians 15, 11. Paul's talking about the other apostles, and he says, whether it is I, he just got done talking about the resurrection appearances. And he says, whether it is I or they, so we preach, and so you believe. This is very important. We're all on the same page. We teach the same gospel. Same thing in Galatians 2. 2 unquestioned Pauline books. The critics will let you quote those 2 verses and not raise a question. In Galatians 2, Paul goes up to Jerusalem again, and there are the four biggest, most influential Christians: Peter, James, the brother of Jesus, John, and Paul. And I don't want to